All right, do we remember our numbers? Yes. 84,000 seconds in a day. 84,600 seconds in a day. Today, my day started at 3:30, so I feel like I'm maximizing those seconds like you wouldn't believe, right? But we're looking at our average of 3,000 seconds. So we come back to our same question: how do your students spend those seconds in a day when they're in the classroom with you, and what it is that you're actually doing? So I thought we would do some Q&A because it's been a while since we've been here, and I was going to specifically structure it a certain way. However, I'm not so sure with just 3, now 4, that we're going to structure it in this way, but let me at least kind of give you an overview to give you some ideas as maybe some of the questions that you might ask, and then we'll do it informally, okay? Basically what I'd like to do is talk about maybe some of the challenges that you've had thus far, because it's been a while since I've seen you. Maybe you've tried to implement something fully, maybe you've only implemented bits and pieces, but what I'd like to know are what the challenges you've had so far in the classroom based on what we've talked about, based on what we've learned over the past several months. And let me give you an example, and then, as I said, we'll just do this informally instead of doing the actual protocol that I had planned. So here's an example that I have for you. Looking at assessing the process of the project, what do we do with grades? We do all these productive tasks in class, but the grade books look like we aren't really necessarily doing anything. And then the question would be, how do you suggest we create meaningful formative assessments? So that's kind of the example that I'm looking at here for what I would want you to think about and maybe ask, and we can share some ideas and just talk a little bit informally about these pieces.
I have one comment.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm.
This is just an example.
Formally, so I have one comment. I would say the one challenge I see that my team is having is getting their skills all taught and in the designated time, according to the curriculum map, and being able to collectively or collaboratively team and create a project together with all subjects being taught and touched on and everybody on the same page. Time frame.
So keep in mind, it doesn't all have to be interdisciplinary. You do not have to try to do all these different content areas. That's really level jumping is what I like to call it. It took me a really long time to get to the point where I was ready to integrate other subject areas into my content because, I was very comfortable, even within social studies and teaching 4 different types of social studies. I chose one to start with, not let me try all 4 at once and try to create a project-based learning experience for it. So don't feel like you have to integrate all the pieces. But when you think about the content and what content is incorporated into the curriculum, it's just thinking about that reframing of the content. So instead of, let me teach A, B, C, and D so that they can get to the end, now it's, let's begin with the end in mind. So let's frame the task first. And then as we're framing that task, whatever we need to do to support our kids, if it's every kid that needs the support, if it's one kid or if it's a group of kids, what do we need to do in order to help them to be able to reach that end goal? So it's just reframing the way in which you present the task. So instead of teaching everything up front and now we do it, let's present this challenge first. And now everything has meaning in terms of the content because we're working toward this end goal.
Let's engage in the conversation now.
Sure.
Happy New Year.
Same to you. Almost happy spring.
Okay, yeah, used to. Well, we're working on a project-based assignment right now with the capstone. I don't know how many of you all are doing capstone. And I was printing off all the different assessments or like the group rubric, I looked for, finally found the multimedia presentation rubric. So I guess for me, it's trying to find what I'm going to use as a formative assessment. We know that the writing piece, the essay is going to be evaluated. There's a rubric for an argument essay. There's a rubric for the multimedia presentation. The multimedia presentation has within it the group elements. But my students are kind of like all over the place right now. And I'm letting them go with it because they have the question and they need to decide what they're going to argue. What should I grade in terms of that process? I would have to create something. I think that's one of the reasons that we're struggling with this is because it's so time consuming to have to create, okay, day one, am I gonna grade the notes that you've taken? Am I gonna grade how you interacted well with your group? What am I gonna look at, or am I gonna just look at the final essay, the multimedia presentation, what the evaluators are going to look at? But I know for me, it would be easier if everything was packaged up for me. Here it is. Not saying that I don't want students to take a project and run with it, a driving question and run with it. I think it's awesome, and I'm enjoying watching them work through the process. But in terms of the formative assessments, I think I would have to kind of scale it down and create some teacher-made formative assessments to address my students' needs. And it's very time consuming. I think we're down to 10 weeks left of school.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, excuse me, 10 weeks left. So
Keep in mind with formative assessment pieces, I should be able to have enough of formative assessments completed that I should predict my end summative assessment. So I know what's going on so that I don't get to the end and I have all these surprises and say, why did Billy fall behind and not have this completed? So is it more time consuming? Absolutely. Definitely. I was more exhausted doing project-based learning than I was doing a more traditional way of teaching. But like you said, the way that the students are getting involved in the process and involved in their learning is what the payoff is. So what happens over time is that you start to compile some of those like very quick and easy rubrics that you can use. So I can use that same rubric in a formative assessment throughout every project that I do because it's generic enough that it will meet the needs of each of those projects. And if you go to my wiki and you click on rubrics, there I have some of those that are there. So my Lauer professional one. So I have some of those. So every time that I'm doing a project and I have my students doing a group discussion, I have a particular rubric that I use for every single one. So they know what it looks like, and then I have that, I can use it very quickly, and now I actually have something in my gradebook that I can say, here's what we did, here's how this student performed, and then I have the rubric piece to back it up. So that when I get to that end summative piece and I'm grading things like critical thinking, I can go back to some of those formative assessment pieces that I did to say, this is how I can say that I was able to assess this child summatively.
That's what I need. I have rubrics for an oral presentation, I have one for a written report, and I have one for a multimedia presentation. But everything.
And those are all summative pieces, right.
But what's happening, that's what I was gonna say, what's happening in between, I don't have a whole bunch of resources for that, or rubrics for that. And a lot of times when we're displaying work in the building, our principal wants a rubric for it. And again, that's very time consuming. I observed in our building when, teachers had stuff all over the walls. And then at a staff meeting, we were told it has to have a rubric. And so the walls are bare because teachers had to, and I found that I've had to create my own rubrics too, because when someone comes in to evaluate and they want to see my assessments, I'm saying, wow, I'm using something generic, and how do the students know that, they're getting a low grade because they're doing what I'm asking them to do, but the quality of the work that they're doing is, they're thinking, hey, I've done the assignment, but I have to look at the quality of the work. The quality of the work is not very good. So just because you've done the assignment doesn't mean that you're getting an A, and that's a lot of work, especially when you're looking for specific things.
And so when I build my rubrics out, I look at very common themes that would go throughout any project. So critical thinking would be one piece that would go throughout. Maybe research might be one thing that goes throughout. Creativity, communication, all of those components, so that I don't create rubric fatigue for myself because I have to reinvent and recreate it. I can then tweak and tailor if I need to each project. But in general, the rubrics are going to look very, very similar. And then that also allows me to do the assessment of my student that's really up here and my student that's way down here without penalizing either one, simply because I've created a rubric that's so specific that, well, this kid only did what was on the rubric and could have gone above and beyond. And this is the kid that could never meet those specifics, but I can look at each student individually, where they are and their capabilities, and then assess them accordingly.
What do you use to do your rubric? Do you use RubyStar or something else?
Type them into a Word document. Yeah.
Because RubyStar is pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
It has examples, but then you can go in there and
You
change
can make
them.
changes.
Yeah.
But yeah, feel
It's
free to
fast.
take any of the rubric ones that I have. If you just go to lauerprofessional.wikispaces.com, and then it goes to rubrics, and then you can use that. Any other questions specifically?
Using this one.
Well, they're looking for, I'm looking at what it says up here about, in our grade books, I'm sure you're saying like, quizzes, tests, that's what you're talking about. Where it's just so broad to where I guess you're saying we need to create the.
And it doesn't always have to be a quiz. It really doesn't. For me, I might have a student that's a really good test taker, so a quiz is good for that student, right? But the other student might not be a very good test taker, might have all the knowledge, so I'm going to want to do multiple types of formative assessments so that I can ensure that I am actually seeing the whole child through that process. So that's where maybe some of those discussions might come into play. Maybe we might do an online discussion for the kid that's really nervous about talking in front of people. So we'll do an online version, but we also have to get that kid feeling comfortable about speaking to other people and communicating orally. So we're going to do some of those oral discussions as well and build up that process for those kids. I was going to do it with you last time, but we didn't have enough of people. Did I talk to you about the Harkness discussion protocol? No. So I wrote a blog post on this maybe just before the first of the year. If you go to not my Lauer Professional, but it will have a link on there on the front page. But if you go to danalauer.com, DAYNALAUR.com.
DAYNA.
Yes, DAYNALAUR.com. And you go to my blog section. I wrote a really detailed blog on how to do it. I call it a spiderweb discussion, but it's based off of the Harkness protocol. And it's a discussion that you can do in class with kids as little as 5 all the way up through adults. I have a lot of schools that, their second graders are doing them on a weekly basis, these discussions, but it will detail out specifically how to do it. The long and the short of it is basically putting students in a circle, and you map and chart their discussion, so whomever starts first, and then you draw a line, and a line, and a line, because you have all your little dots around the circle, and all you do as the facilitator is you give them the initial prompt, and then you just map and you chart, and the kids take over the discussion. So that blog post details how that works. And I do that as an all pass or an all fail thing. I don't have a rubric attached to it. So you can do that, but as I'm charting it out, I'm also taking little anecdotal notes about who said what during that discussion. So I can go through, and you can also, and it's up to you if you want to share the information with parents. Instead of assigning kids names, you could assign them numbers, and then you could show the parent, this was your child, and look at how many times the line came to your child, or how few times the line came to your child. This is one of those pieces that they need to work on with communication. So there are a lot of different ways that you can do that one, but I've specifically detailed it out in that blog post how to actually implement it in the classroom.
We've done something like that with the discussion group with Google Docs,
Mhm.
where we put an argument essay out there, topic, and what side are you
Right.
and just comment on the Google Docs. And we're sharing it with each other. How do you feel about all of the technology now that's out in terms of everything? I'm here now. We're going to digital textbooks next year. So,
What does that mean exactly?
well,
No book.
no text, just like we went from chalkboard to smart board, now we're going from textbooks to ebooks and iBooks.
I mean, and I'll be honest, with the exception of my AP government class, I got rid of textbooks probably in 2006 or 2007. So I mean, I was fine with that because
We're in limbo. We're in
right.
limbo.
And I came from a tech background it was called Classrooms for the Future in Pennsylvania, where I was given as part of a grant program a whole set of classroom laptops with a smart board. Although the smart board I could have done without, that they should have sent that to the elementary school. My kids used it in presentations, that was about it. But the technology piece I think is really important if it's used to actually support the learning experience. But what happens too often are teachers get caught up in let's try this new tool. And it's funny because I'm going to be on a panel with this gentleman in a couple of weeks, and I've seen him present before, and I sat in the hour-long presentation because it's called 60 in 60 tools in 60 minutes, and I sat in that presentation and my eyes just got bigger and bigger and bigger because it was one flashy tool after another, and I said, wait a minute. It doesn't matter how many tools we know or how many tools we can use. The question is, what is the purpose behind using the tool? And does it actually support the learning? So there are some really good resources out there to kind of help you check as to whether or not the way in which you're using the technology is supporting the learning. If you go to LOTI, it's called Levels of Teaching Integration, not Technology Integration. But it's LOTI connection, the LOTI connection.
Levels of teaching integration.
Integration. And what they do is they level you through whether or not you're turning up the heat in the classroom. So it's higher order thinking, authenticity, technology, what's the E I'm missing? I can't think off the top of my head what the E is that I'm missing because it's turning up the heat.
Engagement.
Engagement. It's probably engagement. And then they take you through where you are, and you can even take an online quiz to see where you are, and they will give you suggestions on how to actually turn up the heat in each of those components and where you want to be. Is it a level 5 or a level 6 on all of those pieces? But the technology is really flashy, but what oftentimes happens is school boards administrators say, here, use this technology, and everything's going to be all well and good, but what happens is we're just doing the same thing that we always did before, only faster with the technology. So it's how is it supporting? And then you have to remind yourself, I'm not a technology teacher, and I don't think any of you are in here. It's not my job to teach the kids the technology. I have my curriculum that I need to teach, and I don't have time to teach them the technology. So if you want to learn how to use this technology, you feel free to learn how to use this technology and now use it in the project to support it. But unless it's something that I find to be very valuable that we are going to use over and over and over and over again throughout the class, I'm not going to take class time out to teach you how to do it because I don't have the time to do that. If you go to, it's called cooltoolsforschools.wikispaces.com.
Wait a minute.
Cool, I'm sorry, yeah, cool tools. Cool is singular. Cool tools for, FOR, schools.wikispaces.com. They have, because I have all of these wonderful Web 2.0 tools that I thought, I should organize these someday. And then I came across this wiki that already had them organized. And they have them organized into like graphing tools, polling tools, collaboration tools, presentation tools. And I'll say to my kids, find one of them whichever one you want to use one of those. Mrs. Lauer's not going to learn how to use Prezi because it gives me a headache, right? You want to learn how to use Prezi, use Prezi. Feel free to do that. And they, they're digital natives, they figure it out, they do it. But don't feel like you have to now become responsible for teaching the technology on top of everything else that's already in your curriculum.
The problem with my situation is my kids are MH, and they're afraid to leap sometimes into that.
Right.
Like with Capstone, I've never made the movie yet. I mean, we get right to the cusp, right to the edge and then don't. So this year I hope we will.
Well, we're using Google Slides now.
Google Slides.
Yeah.
Is that with Google Docs or what is
Yes.
that?
It's instead of Google
Yes.
document.
And and I had co-taught classes where I had kids that were in a life skills classroom the rest of the day and would come out for my class and they still use the technology. Did I maybe have to give a little bit more support and one-on-one time with that child to ensure that they were able to use it? Yes. But I'm not going to take a full class period to teach every kid in the class how to use something unless it's something that is going to pay off for all of us in the long run because we're going to use it over and over and over again throughout the marking period or throughout the semester or if you're on year-long schedules.
We've been doing a couple projects that are service-based.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure we really had a driving question, but sort of developing along the way. So that's not your begin with the end in mind, but right now we're collecting cell phones because of the over-mining that's going on for coltan in the Congo.
Mhm.
And they use this the coltan is actually some kind of powder that they use in the phones to make them work at a minute level. That's why everything's microscopic inside and everything because they've got powder in there, this coltan and other things.
Mhm.
It holds an electrical charge for a long time. After I said all that, they're killing gorillas because it's happening where the gorillas live and they're kidnapping baby gorillas and selling them. They're eating gorillas, the people that are mining for the coltan. So we're all about the gorillas, saving the gorillas. And my kids are really getting into this. Well, I think we've collected 18 phones is all, but it isn't that so much. It's just feeling like they're doing something, they're important.
So really, is your driving question then is how
Well,
can we save the gorillas?
Well, maybe. I
Right.
mean, I've integrated it into how we're related to gorillas
Mhm.
through our DNA. It's like
Right.
96% same. So I'm going into reproduction and all that. I'm into a lot of connections.
Right.
We're using coltan because coltan is on the periodic table
Right.
as tantalum. There's just all these linkages
Mhm.
that I'm able to pull in. So it's more about doing something, I don't know. It's all about gorillas. Gorillas are at the core,
Right.
and then everything comes out from that.
Yeah. I mean, it
It is
sounds.
about saving the gorillas, because the
So-
kid said, we've got to save the baby gorillas. They
Okay.
keep repeating that.
So then that's their driving force, which all you have to do is tweak to turn it into a driving question.
Why should we?
Or not why should we, but how can we?
Okay.
Or what can we do to save the gorillas? What can we personally do to help save the gorillas? Right? And then they're learning all of these pieces, the science pieces
Related.
behind it. There's probably lots of social studies components that you're bringing into it. All of those things, and they're really excited about it, which is
Oh, yeah.
even more beneficial. Okay.
Now, I have a question about what you said about you're not going to teach the technology.
Right.
I like when you said that because now we do not have a technology class,
Mhm.
but yet all the students are supposed to be on their computers
Right.
or something of that nature.
That's
So I have an issue because the kids will come to me and they'll say, well, this isn't working or I'm not a computer teacher
Right.
or a
And-
technology teacher.
I mean,
So I have issues with, well, what am I supposed to do in the classroom if I can't fix it or have the knowledge?
who in the classroom knows how this works, right?
Okay.
I just got an email the other day from an individual who's very tech savvy, extremely tech savvy, and she sent it to myself and 3 other very tech savvy people, and it was with PowerPoint. She said, what in the heck's going on? I'm embedding these videos, and then I save the PowerPoint and I go back to play the video, and there's nothing there. There's just a picture. And I was actually on a real vacation, so I didn't answer for a couple of days, and the other 3 very tech savvy people did not know how to do it. And the one individual is like, he's super guru tech savvy. And so I finally responded back and I said, well, it's because you're saving it as a PPT instead of a PPTX. And the old PPT doesn't recognize that. So here are all these very tech savvy people, and nobody could figure it out. But it just so happened that a few years ago, I had the exact same issue, couldn't figure it out, and I was in a workshop and I said, can someone tell me the answer? And someone told me the answer. So it's just a matter of saying, I don't know. Who in the classroom knows? And it's a really hard thing for us as teachers, who we always know what the answer is, right? To be able to say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I just don't know. And so we have to be okay with saying, well, let's figure it out together. Let's see if someone else knows who could we tap into in order to help us with this piece. And there are so many really great tutorials online too. Common Craft does some great tutorials that they're 3 to 5 minute tutorials on how to use a particular tool. And somebody's talking and they're actually walking you through the steps, but it's called Common Craft, and they do a fabulous...
Craft with the C or K?
C.
Okay.
They do a fabulous job with it.
The other thing that we did this year that was meaningful when it came to service project kind of thing was raising money to buy animals for starving people in the world. And it ended up turning into a really good discussion with the kids about hunger and all the misconceptions, the 10 greatest myths about hunger. You know, there isn't enough food to go around and things like that. So it ended up being the whole middle school during the intersession was able to participate in the discussion and watch the videos, and then they were able to give quarters to heifer, and we were able to buy a pig and a water buffalo, that's for plowing, and a rabbit, 3 rabbits, you buy them in a set of 3, and bees and trees for starving people in the world to start little businesses. And it just felt really good for the kids. And it was all about, what do we know about hunger? Is it true? You know, is what we know about hunger true? And that's really the question, I guess.
And did they figure out whether or not it was?
Oh yeah. They realized that there's all these ideas that people believe and they're not true.
Right. And in what they were doing through this process too, they were doing a part in trying to end hunger.
So they felt attached a bit.
Right. So again, it comes back to that driving question, and that they're pushing forward with it. Very good.
Then they didn't want to buy animals because they didn't want people to eat the animals. So some people wanted to buy, water wells and different things. So you got into really deep discussions. I'm a vegan. I'm like, okay, how about some bees?
But what I really like about that is they're not just trying to raise awareness, because a lot of people will stop with, let's just raise awareness. Well, okay, but what does that do? Does it really impact and affect change? But what they're going a step further to actually say, hey, we were able to do our part in trying to put a stop to this, even if it's a small part. So it's going beyond the let's just raise awareness, because a lot of teachers will stop with, well, let's do this public service announcement. Well, it's a 30-second public service announcement, or let's hang this poster up. Well, and then it comes back to the assessment piece. What can I assess about the content in a 30-second PSA? What can I assess about the content in a poster that's been created in terms of your understanding, your deep understanding of that content? So then it limits me as the teacher to be able to accurately assess.
So maybe I need something summative on that at the end of the year, though, to see what they got out of it.
And it could be as simple as, a written reflection, or if they needed to do, some kind of pictorial thing with captions, depending on what their ability level is.
They
could
couldn't
try
get
that
over
too.
the name of the company ever. They just couldn't get over that.
All right, you ready to move on? It's like you had some really good questions for such a small group. Good questions. We'll go back to our 8 essential elements here, keeping in mind that what we just talked about there with the significant content, that's really at the core, and then those 21st century skills. Can we communicate about it? Can we collaborate on it? But most importantly, can we think critically about it? And if we get them to those highest levels of blooms, specifically if we can get them up into evaluation and ultimately into creation level, which we looked at the last time, that's where we want them to be. Those other components really support those pieces, but it has to come back to those two. So we're going to use a little technique here, and you can use this with your kids too. It's called what, so what, now what, right? And we'll start with the what. Well, the what piece is, well, what is project-based learning? So I would like you to take a moment and think about how you would actually define PBL. Because maybe you walked into here way back in October and you were kind of like this gentleman's looking at PBL as this. Hopefully it's become a little bit more clear, and keeping in mind that it's always a growth experience, not only for students but for teachers as well. But how would you actually define PBL? So take a moment, reflect on it, and if you want to chat with each other, you can chat with each other. But I just want to do a little quick formative assessment informally. Yeah, okay, so why don't we kind of bring it to everyone here, or at least bring it to me, because you're having a little discussion here. So how are we defining PBL? And the bits and pieces that I'm hearing I'm liking so far.
Student-based learning based on 21st century.
Okay.
And the needs of the 21st century.
They're trying to answer the
Burning
driving
questions.
question, and so I'm seeing it as there's a lot of things incorporated within. It's not narrow focus. It's whatever helps to answer that question.
And I like the comment where you might have a driving question, start out with something, but then the kids see it in a whole new light and they might go somewhere different with it. So I may create a driving question, but they could create a subset of that driving question and take their own focus on that, because if my driving question is open-ended enough, they should be able to go in multiple different directions. Now, do you, in some instances, maybe have to rein them in because they're getting so far out of the realm of your curriculum, you may have to pull them in, or because it's getting so big that you just don't have the time for it. So you can certainly place curricular constraints on it. So you can give them this open-ended question, but you can say, here are the requirements within this project, and you must do X, Y, and Z in this project. And how you get to X, Y, and Z is kind of up to you, and I'll support you in that process, because maybe you're coming up with a subset of that driving question, and that's what your focus is going to be. But you just want to make sure that as you create these requirements that every student is getting all of that content, because we don't want just one person or a group of people to be this expert on this, but then no one else gets that information. So does it become, if you want to incorporate the technology, does it become a discussion board where they're sharing some different things with it like that? So there are a lot of different ways that you can do that through jigsawing techniques, but you can also require that they have X number of certain components that hit certain topics, right? So it becomes less about the breadth and more about the depth of what it is that they're doing, again, as they're getting to those higher levels of blooms.
And it seems like everything we teach, because of our time constraints, has to be connected directly to one of those standards. So I guess what I'm finding is I'm teaching this westward movement thing that I'm still on, been on all year. And as I'm teaching that, I'm seeing all these different standards that I can pull in. I just keep pulling this and that. It was like that with the gorillas. So giving them the standards that they're working in, that's kind of my parameters.
Yeah, and because ultimately it has to go back to your standards. A lot of times teachers will say, well, what comes first, the driving question or the standard? Do you start with the standard and then develop a driving question, or do you develop a driving question and then you say it matches these standards? And it's the age-old chicken or the egg question. And it absolutely, it can be both. I might just have this idea that pops into my head for this particular unit, and because I know my curriculum well enough, I should be able to go back and match that to multiple standards.
Okay, so, okay, my students are working on the capstone, and so I'm kind of monitoring what they're doing. Some groups are making progress, some groups are talking about, or they're off the topic or what have you, but I did say, well, next week I'm gonna ask for a rough draft of your essay. So that could serve as a formative assessment.
Absolutely.
Okay, so would it be okay if I just took the final rubric and just kind of scaled it back? I'm looking to see, first of all, do you have an arguable statement?
Yes.
Okay. Then second, do you have evidence to support or, to validate what you're saying, what you're arguing? Because I am going to look at that. But how do I know, there's a group of 3, there's a group of 4, what each person contributed, or how to look at that student that is like kind of lost in the sauce.
And so one of the things I have a little bit later on is management pieces, but the real quick answer to that is always go back to the individual. So we all start at that individual basis, and from that individual basis, then we can branch out into the collaborative spaces, because otherwise I don't know who did it, right? Now, if I were truly modeling this in the classroom, if I had asked you about the PBL definition, what I should do as best practice is say, I want you each to write down your definition first, and then share your definition with each other, and now as a group create a definition out of that. But I can go back and I can see what everybody started with to say, uh-oh, somebody's really way off base, or somebody absolutely hit the mark, and that person that hit the mark, well, that's just the one that we decided to use, but what do I need to do to support the rest of the students that didn't have it initially? So yeah, it's always going back to that individual piece. And one of the things that the technology can help with is if you're doing things in Google Docs, you can kind of keep track of who's doing what.
Right.
And so I can see that, and I have evidence of that digitally, which is definitely helpful with the technology piece, but always starting at that individual level.
So basically, they might be keeping a little portfolio of their work all along the way, and it's their individual portfolio. And then you've got kind of a group project going on too, group product.
Yes. So
and that's what's going to get pulled into the video or whatever they come up with.
Right.
Right. I'm still concerned about someone that, is just kind of sitting there, just watching it. I'm just really concerned.
I agree too, because a lot of times, like how do you determine with the capstone if they're doing their work on time, and I can see that. Do you give them like deadlines?
Well,
or?
actually, I have 3 or 4 things on the board, and I say you have your choice, and it's due by, this work is due by the end of the week. So, and then I'm gonna check to see, who's done what. So they're working on it, and I'm leaving them alone, asking, if they need help. But next week, in order to see what they've been writing down, I'm gonna ask for a rough draft, and I want to know who did what, because I'm not collecting 4 different essays if there's a group of 4. I'm collecting 1 essay, and I want to know what you contributed. Like one of the questions is about the one that your group is doing is on which is worse, natural disasters or wars. Okay, so what's your argument? Some students are saying, well, natural disasters because you can't control those. So then, I said, well, we've had natural disasters and maybe, 10 people died. We've had wars and thousands of people have died. So I want to know, what did you contribute to the rough draft? You have information on natural disasters. on casualties. What did you contribute? What did you contribute? What did you contribute? Can you explain it to me? Do you understand? And there might be someone there that's, I don't know, you know, and I'm saying include this person, because I did have a student that has an IEP that was left out, and she's been absent for like a week and a half, and I said, you know, is there anybody that would be willing to, you know, who it
He
is,
knows.
and so would be willing to, and then there was one group that said, no, I know you guys aren't going to really work with her, so then somebody else said, okay, we'll take her in, but she's still lost in the sauce, and you know,
And so we could talk about it now and kind of skip over a little bit of it at the end, which is some of the stuff that I was going to incorporate into the end. But, you know, part of it, if somebody's just absent chronically, you may have to do an alternative assignment that's much more traditional, simply because they're not going to be able to catch up unless they're super child, right? And you really can't hold everybody else back and ask someone else to take them under their wing, and then you know ultimately that person's either not going to get everything out of it and or not do all of the work. So you can do alternative assignments if you need to, but I just wanted to share with you one of those tools that I like, and you can do this digitally on scrummy.com, or you could do it in the analog version. And basically, without actually pulling it up, what it is it will have multiple columns. So in the far left column, it's the to-do list of different tasks. So maybe it's a rough draft or whatever. And then in the next column, you would have it, and think of them as sticky notes. You'll have in progress, right? And you have things that need to be verified, and then you have things that are done. And so digitally, all they're doing is they're moving the sticky notes, and the sticky notes are color coordinated with their name. So I have them create a scrummy. They do it, not me. They set it up, not me. So if they're in a group, it just generates an automatic URL for them, you know, like 86 polecats 22. And they send that link to me. They have all of their stickies with who has been assigned. So Sally has all the pink stickies. And if Sally has an awful lot in the to-do column and not in the in-progress column, well, what the heck's going on here, Sally? Or if it's in the in-progress column, I should be able to go to Sally and say, show me that now. Or if it's in the done column, it should really be done. And if it's not done, now, Sally's not the only one in trouble, but everyone else in Sally's group is in trouble because they let her move it from verified to done, and they didn't verify that it was in fact done. So it's a quick visual for me that if I have 6 different groups, I can see if a group is overall falling behind, or within a group if a kid is falling behind, and then I can specifically talk to each one of them, show me this, show me this, show me this, because that's exactly where you should be right now.
That kind of sounds like Writer's Workshop, but it's individual with Writer's Workshop. That, you know, each kid starts a project and then continues, and there's editing stages and all that. Right.
And you know,
so it's kind of like stretching it to the group.
Another really easy way to do it with kids, and this is from a good friend and colleague of mine that taught 7th grade for 36 years, and he called it Stop, Drop, and Write. He would just announce, stop, drop, write. And whatever they were doing right at that moment, they had to stop, and they had a little journal, and they had to write two sentences of specifically what they were working on and where they were and how they were moving forward. And so you can only lie so many times, right? Before he's going to figure out that you're lying. And so it was just his quick way to make sure that everybody was on task and where they needed to be and who was falling behind that he could check.
That sounds like status of the class. When we're doing Writer's Workshop, I'll say, okay, let's do a quick status of the class.
Right.
And then it's, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do today? What are you going to do today? You know, and then you write it up there, and then they're committed.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there are multiple ways to really approach that, to kind of help to check that each kid is on target. But ultimately, I want everything to kind of go back to that individual level. So if I create a group and I say, okay, you're the researcher, well then how does everybody else learn how to do any research, right?
Right.
Or while we're doing the research, what's everybody else doing?
Right.
So everybody needs to be a researcher. You might be researching different components.
Right.
And then when we get to the end, if somebody comes to me and shows me the extra research that they had to do because you didn't do your part, then you're going to get docked 10% for not having as much research as you should have had done.
You know, you had that question up there about the gradebook.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think it's necessary for, people that have gifts in those areas to do like, the PowerPoint or the
Mhm.
Prezi or what have you, to where everybody can contribute their ideas, but there might be, that student that's really tech savvy, that's good at it. But when in our grade books, you have to put the assignment for everybody.
Right.
So we can't,
So
that's
if-
always been a
if
problem
we
for
go
me
back-
because there've been times.
If we go back to a rubric
Mhm.
that is crafted in such a way, so we're doing critical thinking, creativity, what have you, just because you all turn in this one final product doesn't mean that you're all going to get the same grade.
Mhm.
So based on all the formative assessments that I've done, I can back up how each of you are graded if your grade looks very different at that end final product, because I have all of these formative assessment components. Because your communication skills were subpar to your other group members, and I have all of this proof through that process, and so this is where you were on that rubric.
What about using different rubrics for like the same skill? Because students that, might have an IEP, just like with our current events that they do, their level of summary is not going to be at the level of the college prep students. So they're doing the same assignment, and I don't want to say the expectation is lower, but
Right.
it's not.
It-
Like you
but-
say different.
Right.
It's set to
Different
meet.
needs.
It's set to meet the
Yeah.
needs.
Mhm.
I never did a different rubric. I just took that kid into consideration to say this child is capable of this, and this is where they were in terms of capability. So my kid that
It's like these are for the kids who have MH,
right.
and they're divided into 3 levels, so your rubric is in 4.
Okay.
And this lowest over here, this is where my kids are going to be who have just the slightest amount of comprehension, but these are the high kids.
Okay, where did you get that?
This is from the state, so like it's
The book. I know what I have.
yeah, this is online. You can go, like I printed science yesterday. Yeah, we got this because I teach an MH unit.
She wants the book.
She
We
wants-
like
I
we
mean,
like books.
We
We like
Well, they act like these are gold.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about it is, they told us never to lose it, is it's got your standards
Did you have
and my
language arts?
standards.
Well, where's language arts?
I didn't bring it today. I'm traveling with social studies.
Where did you get that? Where did you get that?
I got this from Jerry Moore because
Okay.
my kids are taking the alternate assessment, and
Okay.
that's what that is.
And and we need stuff like that too.
But you can
You
just
know, I
print
mean-
it, girly.
Okay, I know, I don't have that.
It's prettier in color.
This is just the
Prettier
6
color.
to 8.
Right.
This is for when I can't find my science one. I can't find it. I do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, and that's the perfect resource that the state has already created. So-
That needs stuff.
So instead of having to recreate the wheel, it's already there. It's just a matter of finding what sources and resources
But
are
that's
available.
not a rubric. That's standard.
But you can create your rubric
Yeah.
off of the standards, and so you can
Gives you
do
the range.
you can do multiple
That's
things.
what I want the range.
I mean, you can do the middle range on your rubric and leave it empty on either side
Yeah.
and say this is where you need to be, and then I can put you here, and I'm going to make comments as to why I'm giving you higher, or I'm going to make comments as to why I'm giving you lower, but I'm only actually creating that middle column of the rubric.
3 is easier for my kids to understand than 1, 2, 4.
The other
Especially
piece for me, because I'm just kind of glancing over this, and it looks like on the left hand side those are not the MH standards, but
They're the general ed.
so even within the general ed, so maybe there are 2 bullet points. For me, that's overwhelming for any kid to have 2 bullet points, and it gives them it's too difficult for me to assess 2 bullet points within one category. So I'm only going to do one very specific bullet point within each category. So if there are 2 here, how can I split those into subcategories? Because I don't want a kid to meet it at standard here and be above standard on here, but then where do I put them on the rubric? Because I have multiple bullet points.
Multiple goals.
Yeah.